Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video I'll be sharing with you the top 5 books that I read over the fall season. So the way this video will be structured is that I'll go through all the books that I read over September, October, and November, and then I will do at the end a more in-depth wrap-up of the books that made my top 5 list. So I feel like fall was a really good reading season overall. There were a lot of highs and a lot of lows, so we kind of were all over the board in terms of ratings. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So starting out in the month of September, I first read The Ink Black Heart by Robert Galbraith, which I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which I gave a 2 out of 5 stars. Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. And lastly, The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake, which I gave a 1.5 out of 5 stars. Moving on to October, I first read The Bullet That Missed by Richard Osman, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. The Winners by Fredrik Backman, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. The Nature of Witches by Rachel Griffin, which I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. Babel by R.F. Kuang, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars, and Beyond the One by Tom Felton, which I gave a 4 out of 5 stars as well. And finally, moving on into the month of November, I first read Bluebird by Sharon, which I gave a 3 out of 5 stars, and The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, which I gave a 1 out of 5 stars. So starting up, I first had Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is a book that has been on my radar for a while, and I've heard nothing but great things about it. I've heard Jess at Sunbeams Jess talk about this book. I've heard Leonie from the book Leo also kind of rave about this book, and my boyfriend's read it as well, and he really enjoyed it. So I had high expectations going in, and I think this is a book that is best not really knowing too much about kind of the setting. It's better to just kind of immerse yourself in this world. But basically the synopsis is that we follow Piranesi, who lives in this labyrinth style house where there are oceans within rooms, and it's just never ending. And so the book is told through his journal of him kind of going through his day-to-day life, and the only contact he has with someone that is human is someone that is known as the Other. And there is this air of mystery and also kind of a unreliable narrator aspect to this as well. But like I said, I think it's best to kind of just dive into this not really knowing too much about what is going on. But I will say, like, this book did take me a little bit after I got past part 2. That's when I really started to get engrossed in the novel. But for the first like 50 or 60 pages, I felt like it was a little bit boring in terms of just kind of figuring out what was going on with this character and the world. I felt like it was very repetitive, but once I got past that, I got really engrossed, and it's really a special, truly a special book, and I haven't read anything really like this, so I'm happy I picked it up. And like I said, I really enjoyed it. It took me by surprise because I feel like this one I was kind of stepping outside my comfort zone, but I'm very happy that I did because I ended up really enjoying this. So like I said, I think a lot of you will like this as well. Like I said, I was stepping outside my comfort zone, and I really was pleasantly surprised by this one. Next up, I have The Bullet That Missed by Richard Osman. This is the 3rd book in the Thursday Murder Club series by Richard Osman, and I was really excited for this. I got this one from the library and I read through it so fast. This is a really unique crime series, so it follows, I want to say, 4 friends who live in a retirement village, and they have the Thursday Murder Club where they investigate cold cases, and when they somehow find ways to invert themselves into current murder cases that are currently going on now. So this one follows a news anchor who mysteriously disappeared 10 years ago, and so they decide, you know what, this is a cold case, let's get ourselves and see what we can find, and it kind of goes off from there. I think this series overall is a good blend of murder mystery and humor, like in terms of kind of the dark and light aspects, kind of integrating both of them, so it's not so heavy in terms of it investigating like a murder. Like, I think it does a really good job at you know, blending the two, adding a lot of humor, and just the way the characters banter with each other, the subtle, you know, humor that's integrated into kind of their thoughts is really fun, and just ways that they integrate themselves or find ways to insert themselves into the investigation, I think is a lot of fun. And this is definitely, I think, a series that is worth the hype. I think it's just fun to see what these characters were tackled next, and like I said, it was just a delight to read. On a darker note, we have I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy, and this is a book that I've heard so many things about, and it's one that I'm really glad I picked up. I wasn't a Nickelodeon kid growing up, we were more Disney Channel, but I was aware who she was as a kid, and I just heard so many great things about this. So I got the audiobook from the library, and I was just blown away. I actually had to get my own physical copy because I really wanted it. My sister's read it, and my mom's currently reading it right now. But I think, again, I felt like the way Jennette was able to tackle a lot of these really dark subject matters in a way that I felt was really realistic. And one thing I've talked with my sister about too is how she's able to kind of write from the perspective of a 5 or 6 year old and kind of put herself in that mindset of how she was interpreting those things at this young age. And it's really heartbreaking to see all of the kind of abuse that she had from her mom and how that has caused her to kind of have all these issues, you know, into adulthood. Was really sad. But again, she's able to integrate humor into this, because I feel like if this was very, you know, dark and serious the entire time, I can see how it could be very deterring for the audience, but she's able to add some humor into this, and I really recommend the audiobook too. I was just like, every time I was in my car, I was like, oh my goodness, this is heartbreaking. But I'm sure you guys have heard so much about this book already. It deserves all of the praise that it has gotten, and I think it's a very important read. Just kind of not only showcasing domestic abuse specifically, because I feel like especially moms are always put on a pedestal. So if you say like you have a bad mom, that's kind of, from a societal standpoint, it's always kind of looked down upon. I think that kind of tackles that social taboo. Yeah, but it was just really heartbreaking read, but I think it's one that is very important. And yeah, like the buzz that this book was getting, I think was well warranted, and I think it's a book that everyone needs to read at least once in their lifetime. Next up, I have The Winners by Fredrik Backman, and this is the final book in the Beartown trilogy. And because this is the final book in the series, I don't want to spoil too much about what happens in that specific book, but I will say this book was a really good conclusion to the series as a whole. It was sad, and you kind of, what I think is interesting too is that you do get kind of, it alludes to what happens. Like you basically are told from book 1 what kind of happens, but you don't really know how or why it happens, which I think is a very interesting narration, like narrative standpoint, because I recognize some chapter or like paragraphs that were included in all 3 books, but with each book you kind of get an expansion and know more about it. But the general synopsis of this series is that it takes place in a small town in Sweden that is kind of has a lot of financial trouble, and the highlight and like the shining star of this town is its junior hockey team. And when they finally get into the final round, everyone is really excited, but before the final game, the star player is accused of raping the general manager's daughter, and it divides the town, and it goes off from there. A lot of this shows, one of the like main themes throughout all 3 books is rape culture, victim blaming, and also kind of how interconnected, like the webs that connect people within a community, what divides us, what unites us. And I think it's just an amazing trilogy. It was totally heartbreaking. I read this one really quickly. It was a very massive book. I think it could have been condensed slightly, but I'm happy with how everything was kind of tied up, even though it had a sad ending. I think it was very interesting to see these characters throughout the course of these 3 books, and I think this series is very special and heartbreaking, but it was well worth the read. The writing style is very lyrical as well, which I think is really interesting too, because it is translated into Sweden, so I think the translator does a really good job of kind of adding the lyricism to the writing style, which I think is really good. But yeah, I'm sad that this series has ended. It was very heartbreaking, but it was worth every single tear. And lastly, I have Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is the first book of R.F. Kuang's that I read. I do have the first book in the Poppy War trilogy, but I haven't read that one yet. But my boyfriend read this when it came out, and he said I would really like it, so I also picked this one up as well. And it is kind of dark academia mixed in with fantasy. So this takes place in the 1800s, and we follow Robin, who is a immigrant from China who was adopted by this professor in order to kind of basically train him to be someone who can work with kind of the like silver essentially in here, like silver working, which is based on like languages, and you are able, if you use like similar words that have like the same root in different languages, this silver can do certain things. Like it can make stuff bulletproof, it can make, you know, production in a factory faster. So silver production and silver utilization is very much like valued in England. So this kind of follows Robin growing up and eventually going to Oxford to, you know, to become a silver worker. But in addition to kind of the dark academia themes of just like Oxford and you know, kind of that dark academia vibes, there's also subtle, not subtle, but there's also themes of colonialism, and that plays a major part in this. And I think the like actual title of this is very, very long, but it is Babel, or the Necessity of Violence, which I think is very interesting. It kind of shows how colonialism and violence come hand in hand, and you can't have one without the other. And so I think it was a really interesting kind of viewpoint of colonialism throughout history, and also its repercussions throughout different cultures throughout history, which I really enjoyed. Even though I really enjoyed this book, I did think it had some pacing issues. Like I feel like the first part of the book was very slow, but once we kind of like get to the second half, it really takes off, and I was left speechless with the ending of this. Like I kind of read through the last bit of it very, very quickly because I just couldn't believe what I was reading. I couldn't put it down, and I think this is a very interesting kind of like focus on this aspect of history, that we still see kind of the cyclic repercussions of it throughout, even in modern day, of the impacts of colonialisms from like 200, 300 years ago. And I think this is a very interesting kind of, you know, interpretation of that. So it is a good combination of social commentary on colonialism. It has dark academia, you know, vibes, and also a small kind of thread with fantasy, which I really enjoyed. But when the title is like the necessity of violence, it is actually like the end is very, very violent. So just be forewarned. But this was a very thought-provoking read, and I definitely want to pick up more of her books in the future. That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what some of your favorite books were from this fall season and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.